Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature Podcast, where every week me and David bring two films together. We set them up, we knock them down. We're looking for a perfect marathon of flicks to kill a long weekend and relax with some good movies. And we invite you along to the Double Feature Picture Show. David, how are you doing?
I'm finding it hard to relax since we've decided that Sci-Fi Movie Month is also Sci-Fi Scare Your Pants Off Month.
You know, it happens.
Yeah, but I'm doing pretty good other than that, Dean. I'm feeling, pandemic is kind of, I guess you could say, quieting down in certain ways, and it's nice, a little change of pace. I don't know, how are you? How are you this week?
I am doing as best as you can be because this week, we watched some bangers this week. We watched the film that has the greatest female protagonist in all of cinema, and we also watched the masterpiece, the perfect film of modern filmmaking ever made. David, what movies did we watch this week?
Well, we are continuing along with our theme from last week, which was First Contact with Alien Kind to First Altercations with Alien Kind. Kind of, because one of our movies is a sequel paired with the first of a franchise. We were watching Aliens, the James Cameron prequel, sequel. Same word, but different letters. As well as Predator, the Arnold Schwarzenegger masterpiece that is apparently an art house film by Dean's definition.
This film is art. God damn it. This movie is perfect. But whatever. We'll get into it. But yeah, so so we have two firsts on this show right now for a little intro before we get into things. We have our first James Cameron film. The man whose goal in life is to make all the money film will let him make. And our first Arnold Schwarzenegger film, which is also kind of interesting because, Arnold as this pop culture touchstone of the 1980s, 1990s up to now, he was able to leverage that into a governorship. It's kind of interesting. We get to talk about these two characters, right? So, David, I don't know. What are your thoughts on like James Cameron or Arnold or even Sigourney Weaver?
Well, like James Cameron's an interesting person to talk about right now because lately the buzz about the sequels to his storied once box office gigante, the name of which is escaping me at the moment. Avatar. That's what it is. Yeah. I don't know.
It's not Titanic. That was the other one that made all the money.
Right. Which, I think it was escaping me because it's such a bland name. Listen, Avatar was really the first time I came in contact with a James Cameron movie where I was like, okay, that's what James Cameron is. Because I feel like there's a couple other of his films that are very, okay, this doesn't necessarily look like a James Cameron movie. For example, I watched Titanic before I saw Avatar. And really, it's different because James Cameron is known more for his sci-fi masterpieces such as this, Aliens, or that, Avatar.
Or Terminator 2, Judgment Day.
Exactly, which are also heralded as sci-fi greats. But Titanic has this quality to me where it's like, okay, this I feel like is, aside from the fact that it's a giant melodrama, this is somebody really putting all their skills to work. And I think that's what the essence of James Cameron is he really maxes out or tries to max out all of his skills in each one of his films, which results in these massive blockbuster movies that, like you said, Dean, really try to line his pockets.
I mean, he is responsible for, I believe, 2 of the 3 highest grossing films ever made with Avatar and Titanic. I believe Avatar technically is still the film that has made the most money in modern history. And yeah, I would agree with you. James Cameron as a director is one of those people I've noticed that every time he makes a movie, he is trying to push the boundaries of what you can do at the time. With Titanic, it was okay, we're gonna push like computer technology that you can get and create all these giant CGI backdrops, all the computer generated effects. He's able to rebuild the Titanic with a computer. Avatar was kind of the same thing with 3D with IMAX. I remember Avatar, for the most part, that was the first time IMAX became like this huge thing that's like this is like what you do a big movie on. Because that was, I think it was the first 3D IMAX film that was huge across the nation.
Yeah, that's what I remember about it, particularly because my mom has motion sickness, and when we went to see Avatar the first time with 3D IMAX, everything, she had to go like out to the parking lot and puke her brains out. But that's the memory I associate with Avatar. But yeah, I was kind of looking at the highest grossing films list, and I feel like you were to your point about Avatar, Titanic, and then other films on this list. This kind of point about film movements boiled down to maybe now film fads, or there's probably another word for it that's probably more friendly to the fact that these things make billions of dollars. Because a fad doesn't make billions of dollars. It makes you enough money to get to the next fad. I don't know what you would call it, but yeah, I feel like James Cameron is also one of these people that tries to do what's new and interesting as much as possible, because I do remember like all the IMAX 3D stuff. Titanic was like a huge production feat. Terminator, even if you go back to that, was like a wildly popular premise boiled down into a, you could probably say, lower budget end sci-fi movie that just makes for economic success. Aliens this week is kind of also on this trend of production, which I will talk more about in length later because of certain things I was kind of impressed with for 1986.
Oh yeah, and that just goes to the fact that James Cameron, no matter what people say, because he is a difficult human being to like, because he's kind of an asshole if you ever meet him. But he's a damn. I've seen enough interviews with the guy, and I saw an interview with his wife, or his ex-wife, and she said, "Look, he's difficult with his actors, but at least they can like go home afterwards. I live with the fucking guy." He's one of these people who's very particular and very like work obsessed. He's just kind of a prick, but he's a master of his craft.
Yeah,
and
I was that's an interesting point to bring up, this thing of like difficulty with actors, because like a behind the scenes thing is Dean and I are working on something right now where I've had to kind of go through the thought process of like, okay, what do I need to do as a director to approach acting, right? Like, it's going to be a new thing I figure out. And part of me is just like, I wonder what's going through James Cameron's mind, right, as a director, where being difficult with actors, and this is of no offense to most of James Cameron's movies, but when I look at his movies, I'm like, this isn't Shakespeare. I don't feel like a whole lot needs to go into telling the person what to do in front of the camera or how to say what they need to say. So part of me is like, I wonder what he's looking for that's so particular in those moments.
I've heard him described as a director more obsessed with spectacle than humanity, and I've also heard him basically be stated that he likes to look at the humanity within the spectacle, because his movies are big spectacle kind of things. It's like, oh, the Titanic's going down. It's this giant spectacle moment. Like, you're gonna pay money to see them destroy this like giant tanker. Avatar, you're gonna see the movie because it's these big spectacle, the flying, the giant robot fights. And he likes to focus on like the little humanities, the little love story in Titanic, in Avatar, even in Aliens. The spectacle of these colonial marines shooting down, having this big old like Vietnam style combat encounter with these alien beasts. And he focused on the humanity of Ellen Ripley and her kind of adopted motherhood with Newt within that context. But he is in fact he's a masterful director. I just know he's kind of difficult with certain actors because he's very anal about things. He's very particular.
Yeah.
And he's also the kind of director where he will tell everyone on set how to do their job because he actually knows how to do your job. And it's weird. But on the opposite end of that, we have a returning director with John McTiernan, I believe is how you pronounce his name.
Fair enough.
And you would remember this man because he directed your favorite film we've done on the podcast, a little film called Die Hard.
That's going to be an interesting point of conversation here because Die Hard is top to bottom pretty much a perfect movie, right? I mean, it's tight. It has just enough character in it. All the production is really well executed. It's like none of it's slow. It's all very well paid. Everything about Die Hard is just chef's kiss. And then we have Predator.
Whoa, okay. Predator is perfection. You better watch yourself.
Listen, the idea of Predator, really awesome. It is. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, you put muscly, sweaty guys with a bunch of guns and explosives in a jungle in which they have to save a cute girl from the grips of this invisible alien assassin headhunter or whatever you would want to label the Predator as. It's a beautiful thing. It was fascinating because this is my first time seeing Predator. What the actual execution looked like, aside from the clips I've seen on the internet, because I've never seen how they did the invisible graphics. I hope I never saw the invisible. Like I really, but we'll get into that. We'll get into that later because there are certain things to praise about both of these movies. There's certain things to pick because they are, old.
Yeah, and we still have our little intro here because, John McTiernan, director of Die Hard, he's a guy who has a lot of pedigree in terms of the action genre, and Predator's his second film. Die Hard was his third film, by the way.
Yeah.
Which, insane. But we also have Mr. Arnold Schwarzenegger here. Arnie, as, some would like to call him. And it's going to be interesting to talk about this guy's Arnold Schwarzenegger, because is he an actor of contention now? Like, or have people just agreed that he is a good actor, or is he a bad actor? Have we agreed on what is Arnold Schwarzenegger?
So it's kind of like, I was thinking about this while watching Predator. The modern Arnie is probably The Rock. I mean, if we want to cut it down to size, there's the cultural phenomenon, the muscles, the looks. That's pretty much what they all have going for each other. The only thing that's kind of different is Arnie has like this exotic mystique about him because of that lovely Austrian accent.
Yeah.
Whereas The Rock is he's like the golden orator. And I was kind of thinking it's like, okay, if you put him in Predator, it's perfect. This was made for him. This was made for Carl Weathers. These people exist within this world perfectly. Yeah. Then you get to Arnie movies like the comedies they would put him, right?
Oh, like Twins?
Yeah.
With Danny DeVito?
Or others, and it's just one of those things where you start to wonder, okay, what's the reasoning for putting Arnold Schwarzenegger in these things, right? Because there's a certain quality to it that's like, yeah, he's perfect. I couldn't picture any of these movies without him, but it's also like, I feel like you could just as well find other things for him that might include more explosions. I don't know. Could you do Kindergartner Cop, which might be the perfect medium without him? I don't know. But I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, I think I boil it down to this. I'm glad Hollywood did what they did with him. But do I think he's an Oscar-worthy actor? Or anybody for that matter? No. Do I think he could be in contention for a Golden Globe given the right stuff? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. It is interesting that you bring that up, because Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's an actor that I think at this point has entered into a realm that is usually saved for people like Charlie Chaplin and John Wayne. He is an actor that everyone knows. He's like a cultural touchstone kind of thing. Because I can't imagine people not knowing who he is if you're of a certain age, right? Like, you had to, like, Terminator is a good one. Like, he is the Terminator. Predator, Conan the Barbarian, so on and so forth. Like, he's one of these actors that he might not have been in a lot of A-S tier movies. He's been in a lot of like whatever action flicks, but it's one of those things where it's like I can't imagine. I don't think Arnold's actually a bad actor, if I'm being completely honest. I think he is a person who has a lot of charisma and a lot of screen presence, and he's just, he's kind of like an actor who just doesn't have a whole lot of range.
Yeah.
Like he is kind of funny, he's goofy, but he's probably not Daniel Day-Lewis kind of levels, but that's besides the point. It is going to be interesting when we talk about him in this movie.
Yeah, and it really does make me wonder, is it kind of like a fun aside, is like I wonder who's going to be the next one of him, because I know it's like The Rock is here right now, but The Rock is also, I mean, he's not in his 30s. He's up there in age. Because he came from that same phenomenon that pushed out the likes of John Cena, where they spend most of their younger, probably better years for if you actually wanted to put them on screen. In the good old WWE, which
the professional wrestling industry.
Yeah, and then that pushes that's the whole Vince McMahon economic plan is find big muscly guy ? Profit.
It's worked for him so far.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things where it's like, I wonder what's going to be the next that. Because then, okay, The Rock's here, and I don't think he'll be gone anytime soon, because Arnie's not even gone. He's just, comes in and out every now and again. John Cena's here, and he'll probably have a good run. He's currently in that whole Fast and Furious thing and doing his own stuff.
Well, actually, it's interesting you bring that up, because do you remember when Vin Diesel was being pushed as like a solo action star? Fast and the Furious, Triple X. They even tried to put him in the Pacifier, like the kid-friendly action movie.
Yeah, I do remember the Pacifier.
Yeah, I remember people were saying that Hollywood was trying to find the next Arnold Schwarzenegger when Arnold went off to Hollywood. Or sorry, not off to Hollywood. He went off to like California to be a governor, to run for office.
Oh yeah, that was a thing.
Yeah, he won. He was our governor for like, I don't know, 4 or 8 years. I can't remember. But when he left, Hollywood was like, well, you were the most bankable action star we have, so we have to find a new guy. And they tried Vin Diesel. I think they tried like Timothy Olyphant was another one they tried in like some really bad like Hitman video game movies. But that was the thing. They kept, like, Hollywood kept trying to find the new Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then they finally found The Rock. I remember Scorpion King, gentlemen. I remember when he first stepped foot into the role of Arnold Schwarzenegger would have played.
That's true.
So
I don't know. It'll be interesting to see, because this also comes into question like the role of action movies in our decade 2020, or the new 20s, which is weird to say, I guess, but that's, I guess, maybe for the end when we get to more of the wrap up and discussion. Why don't we move this puppy along, Dean? I think you want to go over little log lines real quick.
I think that's about that time. Let's hear some log lines. Hit the music. Let's get there.
Right. Log lines for this week. Aliens. Aliens, not alien. Aliens is about a shell-shocked warrant officer that returns to the depths of space, where an alien invasion wiped out her crew to respond to a silent colony of terraformers with a squadron of Marines. Predator is about a team of expendables that plunge into the thick jungles of Central America for a search and rescue operation that was sabotaged by an extraterrestrial assassin.
Now, where do you want to start?
Well, this is a good question. I did Aliens into not Contact. That was from last week. Predator. A lot of one-word titles this month.
It's gonna break in the next episode, but it'll be fine.
Thankfully.
But I did the same. I did Aliens into Predator.
Okay.
Because Predator is a movie from my childhood, so I've seen it a bunch of times, so I just needed a refresher.
Right.
Aliens, it's been a minute.
Okay. Then let's just dig right into this James Cameron masterpiece. Dean, why don't you give me a little bit of that context? Let's see what all is going on with this thing and where it came from.
The context of Aliens. So Aliens comes out in 1986, and this is right after the success of James Cameron's Terminator. And James Cameron goes in to pitch to Fox, 20th Century Fox, the idea of a sequel to the 1979 film Alien, directed by Ridley Scott. And Fox wasn't really sure about it, and then Fox said, well, we really liked your script for Terminator, and we really liked your spec script for Rambo Part 2, Second Blood, and they decided to greenlight it. So with that and their blessing, they gave James Cameron a bunch of money and sent him off to Pinewood Studios in England, which he hated tremendously, but he managed to make a masterpiece with Sigourney Weaver. Aliens. But yeah, so that's how this movie kind of came into being, if I'm being honest with you.
I like it.
Yep. And yeah, David, the rundown for this story, do you want to give this a shot?
Yeah, so basically this is the sequel to the first movie Alien, in which our lovely main character, played by Sigourney Weaver, is floating through the dark depths of space and is picked up by some scrappers. They discover her inside of her stasis pod and return her to a space station above Earth, where she finds out she's been in that puppy for about 57 years, if I'm correct.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously, that would bring a lot of nightmares. 57 years worth, in fact, in which she is severely under what seems to be some sort of PTSD spell, waking up with cold sweats, thinking about that horrible, horrible alien that killed her entire crew and sent her alone into space. You know, it's something minor, like a fender bender.
You know, yeah, it's a thing.
So that would weigh on you pretty heavily, and when presented with the option to go back and help a group of Marines search for a terraformer group that has gone silent near the area in which this happened, she's like, that doesn't sound like a great idea, because I almost died out there 57 years ago. I'm not trying to do it 57 years later. But, of course, the nightmares persist, and she says, okay, if you're going to go destroy them, I'm in. So they go. And it takes a long time, but they get there, and once they get on the planet, they find, this place is pretty quiet, which should be pretty good evidence to make you think that people were wiped out by a violent species of alien that is trying to reproduce rapidly.
Well, you know.
But they search the base and come across a lone surviving child who's been hiding in the air ducts and crawl spaces of the massive station, who also has apparently been going to the bathroom and eating in the same place for who knows how long. But we're gonna kind of ignore that and go over the fact that this main character, Sigourney Weaver, and our little girl Rebecca, I think is her name, correct? Or Newt, I think is her nickname.
They call her Newt.
Yes, they form a little bit of a bond, which will form into a bit of a mother-daughterish bond thematically, though it's never explicitly stated. And as the Marine Tactical Force is picked off one by one, as both of these movies will have, we get further into the depths of hell, in which is inhabited by a bunch of eggs of the alien, which is just absolutely fun, isn't it? And disgusting, which is honestly one of the best parts of the production of this movie. So, what next, other than, oh, by the way, they're reproducing on top of a nuclear reactor, so you can't shoot them, which is a lovely note that they put in there. So they have to burn them out. But when they come across the Queen while trying to get off the planet, trying unsuccessfully a couple times, the Queen hitchhikes with them back to their ship, which will take them back to Earth. So what else do you have to do? Get in a mech suit and push her out into the void of space again. Which she does successfully, and everybody lives happily ever after for now, question mark?
Wait till you see the sequels. But yeah, so... yeah, that's basically the plot of this entire movie. And so, is this plot? How simple is this plot, really, when you think about it?
Okay, so this is kind of interesting because this is another one I watched with the girlfriend and everything. Put on a movie later at night, and I think both of us, like, she didn't watch the first 45 minutes of the movie with me, and I was able to explain a couple things to her, and she was able to follow it. I think this comes down to one of those things where it's like, this is a James Cameron quality of like making the movie quite long in the tooth. You know, he is known for these epics, Avatar and Titanic included, probably because they make him a lot of money in the end. But there was a part of me that's like, I feel like James Cameron attempted to go into this like as if he was tasked with building the world, when I'm like, we've already done this movie. I know this is the first time we've seen Earth in this sci-fi world, but part of me was like, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of world building here that doesn't need to happen, because there's an interesting bit to this that, again, it's one of those things where I don't quite remember if this is part of the original Alien, but now we're getting the corporate side of things in this, right?
Yeah, with Wayland Yutani.
Yeah, and that certainly, I think, adds a fair point to the story, you know, especially because all of this terraforming is not sponsored by the government, but private interests, which is kind of a theme in a lot of these like sci-fi future movies. It's a little dystopian. I feel like there's a little bit more of that, although not quite in a silly way, Terry Gilliam-esque bureaucracy going on here, especially with her having to explain to a board of directors that there's a violent alien trying to come back to Earth, and no, you probably shouldn't study it because it will kill you while suspended in the slide under your microscope. I don't know, man. Part of me was struggling with the fact, like, okay, 2.5 hour movie. I never felt like it was terribly slow in any given part. I do feel like at times there was like repetitive things going on. I noticed when it was trying to stretch out. That's for sure. Because
really,
okay, so let me put it this way, right? Towards the end of the movie, and this is also why I think it could have been at least 15 minutes shorter. You get that moment where it's like, you think it's about, or for me, I thought she was about to destroy the Queen then and there, but because James Cameron had this idea of like fighting the Queen in the mech suit, which is a set piece, so it's like, I'm sure that came up when he was originally conceptualizing the movie. It's the kind of thing that you would think of as a director and be like, this is a selling point, because it's cool.
Then,
it's
you know,
cool. I mean, I'm not gonna lie.
We have Chekhov's mech suit in the beginning of the movie, so come on.
Yeah, it's like where you need it. It's like, okay, this is a setup. But yeah, it was one of those things where it's like, I did feel like it was just stretching it in order to get them back up to the ship. When all along, I feel like, okay, if you're going through a lot of this other crap, I feel like you could have gotten the mech suit down to the planet at some point in order to stave it off and make it so that, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's balancing like necessary plot points, and they've also stretched this as long as it can go.
I mean, so this is an interesting point, because I think we disagree on this one.
Okay.
Because I don't feel that the movie's stretching very much. Like, I feel like we have about as much of the movie as we could get. And I don't think there's wasted time in here. Is that just me? I don't think there's anything wasteful in the movie. I think the last set piece works really well. I'll give you that it's very obvious that was a action set piece to close the movie. But I think it works really well because it feels like the ending of Ripley's arc, where, you know, it's these two, you know, women characters defending their young kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting thematic moment at the end of the movie. But I think it needed to be on the ship. It needed to be on the ship where the Colonial Marines invaded the Queen's territory, and now the Queen invades her territory, and it's that dichotomy going on. I don't know. Do you really think the pacing of the movie is slow, or do you just think there's a couple scenes that it could go without?
No, I don't think any of it's very slow because what I do think that this movie gets better than Predator is like not it's not stretching because that's the word we're using for kind of this describing the pace. I'll say it's more fleshed out in the way that they deal with the antagonist, right? Which is the alien in this scenario. Because while in the first movie it's just one alien, one ship, now they're dealing with okay, what happens when there's multiple of them? What happens when there's the queen? So it's like a lot of that's interesting because when you think about the first Alien, it's like there's a lot to learn there, and now you're seeing more of it, which adds to this kind of world building in sci-fi. So all that is like full, and to your point too, the one thing I will credit James Cameron with the most is like you said, there's a really great character study going on here as well as a sci-fi movie, because we got Sigourney Weaver in the first one being an action hero, and then in this one we get to see more of the character's kind of aftermath is how I would describe her. Is like this is her becoming comfortable with the experience that happened. It's the soldier has returned home, and how do they reintroduce themselves back into society? It's like by connecting themselves to something, and what more can she connect with herself with than a child? The whole mother thing, which is then it's kind of a similar thing to Arrival. Now that I think about it, there's this kind of thing where aliens, for some reason, might be able to connect to mothers pretty well.
I guess. I mean, okay, so you brought up world building, and it is true. Aliens feels like the movie that is tasked with building the world and more of the lore of what's going on, because Alien, the original, there's not really a lot of world building going on. We're in this kind of future that's a little shoddy. We're not following great astronauts. We're following like space truckers for the most part. But with aliens, like I think Weyland-Yutani, that's the first time we ever see it in this movie. Like the Alien Queen, first time we ever see it. Like the terraforming stuff, that's the first time we ever see it. The huge things are going on here. The Colonial Marines spawned from this. And it is interesting so that James Cameron felt tasked with, well, we're doing this sequel. We can't just copy the last one. We have to build the world up more, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah.
And the other thing about, the character study going on, I've heard this repeated about this movie over and over again, and I always thought it was kind of bullshit until I watched it this time. This film feels like a commentary on like the Vietnam War. Is that just me? I can elaborate a little bit, but I want to hear your thoughts out of the gate.
Well, I kind of get what you mean, because like I felt like there was a lot of, and it was much more apparent being that it was a jungle war movie, but I got the Vietnam War thing in Predator as well. It's like a team of commandos in the jungle. All of them are kind of oorage, but
Yeah.
I think much more. There are certainly like production design and costume design influence for the Vietnam War, certainly. And you have writing on helmets. You have basically a commando's outfit for a space marine, which is an unorthodox in a good way choice, where I was kind of sitting there like, I would think they would have like mech suits in the future, like we normally see, but I kind of enjoy this like scrappiness to them, which was kind of like Vietnam-esque. But to your point, this kind of story analyzation of the Vietnam War, and I think that Ripley certainly exemplifies this soldier returned home who is shell-shocked, basically, and dealing with that requires closure in any sense, or logically you would think, and I think so. I don't know, because I don't know. I feel like this is a good example for maybe analyzing that period of America that this is happening in, because I feel like you could just as well take the whole corporate terraforming combining with the Marines thing and look at the Gulf War a little bit, which was, I don't know my 80s American war history very well, but I think it was around that time that all that was going on.
Well, I just reflect on it being a Vietnam era thing because James Cameron, like I said, he did a script work on Rambo Part 2,
Yeah.
which is, Rambo which is, the Rambo movie where it became an action franchise, where he goes back to Vietnam to save the POWs, yada, yada, yada. So I'm wondering is when he was writing Aliens, that Vietnam thinking kind of bled over because it feels like we have this colonial marine force invading this settlement, the terraforming settlement, and they go in, they have superior technology, superior weaponry, superior everything, but they are overwhelmed by the native inhabitants. And it's because the native inhabitants, they crawl through the tunnels, literally like in Vietnam. They're more attuned to the environment. They are working ambush tactics. It's a thing where if this movie legitimately played exactly the same and you just changed it to where instead it's colonial marines invading a terraformed settlement, it was regular marines going to like a Vietnam village or whatever, it would almost play out the same way. That also is kind of hard to swallow because it goes into the dehumanization of the enemy, but that's besides the point.
Kind of. I mean, I like so. This is kind of I think why I likened it to the whole like probably at that time again burgeoning Middle Eastern conflict because part of me was like, okay, certainly a little bit of the motivation for all this is oil, and I feel like that is similar to this terraforming idea. It's corporate interests that are really going in there and dealing with that whole thing. Because what's the whole motive for the conflict? And that obviously becomes like a point in the story that's very well used. I mean, I think it's perfect. And I almost felt like I could have gotten more out of that side because I guess this is a good point to talk about is we have this really classic use of what's called like the fake ally opponent where you have
Burke.
Yeah, Burke he's on Ripley's side. He's trying to get her to go out there to help these guys so they can get back this asset basically. This is a portfolio asset they're talking about here. They don't really care that it's a planet, there was a population of people. What they want, like he says, is a multi-million-dollar installation to be operational again. And at first, you kind of think, yeah, it's like that's a fair motivation. I mean, you don't want to just waste that thing not trying. But then he gets into this concept of like greed, or what I get out of Burke too is this idea of my ass is on the line, so I got to take this into my own hands. It's kind of like this corporate desensitization or something. Because I never get straight. I think Burke is the one trying to be like, my money's on the line, because it's not his money; it's the company's money, and he'll just get fired. Which
you're never getting Burke as the main evil. You're getting him as like a henchman.
Yeah, he's the vehicle for that evil to work through, and I just feel like they could have pronounced that more in some way, shape, or form. Because like, there's that moment at the beginning, right, where she's talking to that CEO type. I can't really remember his name. And she's like, well, why don't you check it out yourself? And he's like, I don't have time for that. But that was like a perfect moment to set up that for the rest of the movie. You know what I mean? Like, that totally would have been satisfying at the end for that guy to get to his comeuppance. Whereas Burke is kind of like, he tries a lot to be personable to the point where I'm like, I don't totally care one way or the other that Burke died. Especially because it was fairly quick. You know, it wasn't a dramatic moment.
Well, I think it's the thing where the Burke character, he's just slimy.
Yeah.
He's like the slimiest guy. And I felt satisfied with his demise because he, locks all the Marines and Ripley and Newt into that room and basically leaves them for dead for the aliens. And I felt like, yeah, I'm okay with this guy dying. It's a satisfying thing. I do understand your point where he isn't the big bad evil. He's just a conduit for it. He's the middleman. And it's like, we're not going to get the downfall of, the evil corporation that sent them in. We're going to get the downfall of their vessel, their conduit. And I think that even goes back into the metaphor going on here. It's like, yeah, the shady CIA guy that sent the Marines into the jungle, he's the one who gets his comeuppance, but the government's not going down. Going back to the Vietnam analogy.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting point. And there's I think there's a lot to unpack here in terms of like the themes and those things going on, but I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the production of this movie, or at least the design of it.
Which was, immediately impressive. Especially when you consider this is, again, still only 1986, which, I don't know, there are certainly parts of this movie that it shows that it's 1986. If, like me, I watched that original 1986 theatrical version, so I'm getting all of it face value. Same. There's that, I think, because in my DVD it said there's a 1990 remaster, I think, or something like that. And I don't know what they all updated, but even still, for all of like the even a little bit cheesier bits in our year 2021, I still was like totally into the like you said, massiveness and depth that they go into with the production, because there's certain things in this that really make me feel like this world is huge that we're working with. The ships, which I guess is back on its miniature design, especially, well, you can notice some of the miniatures and some of like the smaller ships flying through the structure. But
yeah,
I mean, there's I guess two things that I was really impressed by. The first dropship crashing, I was like, that was exactly the action explosion I was looking out of for this movie. Very well done. And then also the climactic, the terraforming unit blowing up at the end was just insane.
You're just like, the explosions, man.
Well, I was just like, I was so impressed with like how big they made that thing seem. Because all it is like painted artwork kind of backgrounds and all this thing. But they really worked with like the perspective to make that look like the dwarf Sigourney Weaver and Newt, or Ripley and Newt or whatever. I don't know.
I think that goes into something. So I believe we've talked about this before. It might have been a lot of episodes before, but I think this has come up. Is practical versus computer generated effects. So in Aliens, everything's a practical effect. You do use some optical effects here and there to do like a lot of like the backdrops and stuff like that. Those are like optical effects where it's like rear projection, forced perspective, and things like that. But everything's practical. When they're running through the sewers and the halls, that it's like a real set. There's not like a green screen behind them that they're superimposing. When the ship crashes, it's like a miniature crashing into a thing. Then there's like a kind of a real explosion. There's like a forced perspective going on. The set they're on is actually a real place. And it goes into, those things hold up so well now. Because I agree with you. The ability for the explosions of the crash. I think the crash is a good example. Because it shows a little bit of everything. We have miniature work. We have the forced perspective of making it seem this huge thing crashing down and making this huge explosion. The huge explosion's real. The actors are seeing real fire. But the thing hitting isn't real. And they're on this set, this alien set, quote unquote, that feels like it goes on forever. Like they're actually on like an alien service world. And it is fascinating. The production design of this movie is incredible. And it was almost ruined by the cinematographer.
Oh my God.
Would you like that story?
I would, because I think I'm realizing more and more the more we talk about this why James Cameron's an asshole. Because this was kind of something I was thinking when talking about Burke, is I was like, the more and more I think about it, the more and more I'm like, he did Slimy pretty well, because of the whole kiddo and his hair is very, even though it's very 1980s, it's manicured in a way, especially that
He doesn't look like the scruffy like space marines. He looks like the corporate
he
asshole
looks like
that's
he's on
trying
a
to sell you
cabin
insurance.
retreat. I mean, he's wearing basically a Patagonia vest and a flannel. He looks like he's going
Yes.
camping, and those parts of him are great. But at the same time, I do feel like at times the acting could have gone further, to the point where I'm like, I'm sure that's why James Cameron yells at his actors. But now that I've learned that bit, I would like to know what really, really probably makes James Cameron blow up on set, in which we'll find lost tapes in some years of a Christian Bale-esque meltdown.
So, the making of Aliens was hell.
Mm.
Absolute hell. So, James Cameron, he gets this he gets a bunch of money. He's going to Pinewood Studios, which is an English studio, to make Aliens. And when he's making it, the biggest thing that comes across is the British cast and crew, because Pinewood Studios is not like an American crew. Because when you go to the studio provides you a crew. Cinematographer, ADs, all that stuff. They just provide it. It's a house crew. And in England, they don't work like American crew does. Because in America, for American film sets, a 10 to 12 hour workday is pretty average for making a film. Because making a film is a lot of time and it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of money. So you do like 10, 12 hour workdays for like a lot of productions, which James Cameron was super used to. These guys were like 6.5 work days was like what they're used to. So they're like working 12-hour days and they're like, why the fuck are we doing this? And they would break all the time for tea. They would do all that shit. So these guys were like actually assholes to James Cameron, because they're just like, why the fuck are we working with you? To the point where they were like, we don't know how good you are as a director because we have no idea who you are. So James Cameron brought them Terminator. It had not been released in the UK yet. They've never seen it. Terminator, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger, the movie that launched Arnold into the popular consciousness, the movie that made James Cameron all the money the first time. And they either hated it, walked out halfway through, or didn't show up to the screening. And James Cameron's like, all right, fuck you guys. But now the cinematographer, when they were shooting the scene where the Colonial Marines and the aliens meet for the first time, that big fighting like shootout with the flamethrowers, the shotguns, they're in the nest. And you know how it's lit very, very dark and moody, and it feels so claustrophobic, and there's could be anything in the shadows.
Yeah.
It's a real mood piece. Yeah, the cinematographer insisted on flooding it out, lighting the entire thing so there's no shadows. So you could see all the detail work in the production design, because the English studio, they did all the production design for it, so he wanted to showcase it. And James Cameron's like, no, light it darker. And he refused. Then James Cameron fired his ass, and then the entire crew walked.
Oh my God.
And then it took like another like $2 million to bring them all back. Yeah, so that's the production history of Aliens, more or less. To the point where at the end, the last day of shooting, James Cameron said, well, I am happy we have finished my movie. I hope all of you rot in hell, and leaves. Last thing he says to the crew. Last day of shooting. Grabs the film canister off the camera and walks. Never sees him again.
Fascinating. And you know,
Yes.
I really would love to know what anybody who worked on that crew who felt that way would think now, knowing that they worked on, because that's one of those things where I feel like, you know, in the moment you're probably like, oh, it's just some sequel to some fucking stupid American sci-fi movie. But years later, we're like, this is one of the most successful movies ever. I wonder how much of an asshole people feel like, especially because okay, this is an interesting thing to talk about. Why would you, as a cinematographer, I know it's much less commonplace, I think, nowadays for crew and cinematographer to be like, no, I'm going to shoot it the way I want because you're the director and you work with actors. Nowadays, the director is pretty much handling all of the choices for everything, aside maybe a few things. because nowadays it's also much more common for directors to just have a team up with a cinematographer for most of their career. So it's just one of those fascinating things where it's like, why would you, like, as a cinematographer, be like, despite the tone of the scene, the point of the scene, and even just like logic of the scene, seeing as they're deep inside a nuclear facility that has been run over by these reproducing, sticky, disgusting aliens, why would you choose to be like, it's noon inside this place? It's just light the whole damn thing up. That seems so asinine
Right?
to me.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, there's probably a lot of good reasons that guy came to that conclusion, but I haven't heard him, so I ain't gonna talk
Because
about
I don't think there
All
are
I
any.
know-
I mean, that sounds like vanity as in its most potent form, in my opinion. Because there's just all of the decisions that go into the creative side of film seem like they would have been thrown out the window to make that decision. Because okay, you made great production design, but what good is production design if it looks crappy on film? You know?
Oh yeah. And that's like the biggest hurdle, right? You have to get over when you watch this movie is to know that there is so much bullshit behind the camera that we never get to see. And that's a testament to how good this movie is. Because I mean, you've seen movies that are like kind of bad and then you find out that the production was like really horrible for people, and then you're like, that's why this movie feels so bad. But Aliens doesn't feel like that. This movie's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, overall, again, despite like little things, overall, I'm like, this was exactly what I expected. It's exactly as people have heralded it. One of the most engaging sci-fi stories in that they found a way to make it human as well as about being scary and kind of thought-provoking in a sci-fi sense. And, you know, overall, just probably textbook if you're going to be handling anything like this, like a sci-fi blockbuster type movie.
I mean, this movie's template has been used over and over again. It's been copied and pasted on every kind of genre you can think of. Most first-person shooter video games just do this movie.
Pretty much. I mean, when you think about it, this and the movie we'll be talking about in a moment, I kept finding things throughout them where I was like, yeah, this sounds exactly like the line from this video game, or, you know, famously even you could say this, I keep this around for Close Encounters line directly in Call of Duty Modern Warfare, which is one of my favorite lines in any video game ever.
It's so good. Low key, I was watching this movie and then I heard that line and I almost just booted up Modern Warfare on my PlayStation right after the movie. Oh,
gotta love it,
he's
man.
Good shit.
Gotta love it. And you know, you gotta, in some ways, you gotta love this next movie, Predator. We're gonna move on to that right after when, Dean?
Right after, we're going with right after this.
Dean, I found a great way for us to do something cool and to make a little money on the side.
Great. I've been looking for a new place to put my money. What do you got?
No investment needed. In fact, it's super easy, and there's creation tools we can use to record our podcast right from the phone or computer.
Wait, why would you record a podcast on your phone? You want? No, never mind. Where do I put my money for this?
I don't need any of your money. We can even get our podcast distributed to big streaming platforms like Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Oh, I get it now. We're talking big business here, okay? So you're going to need a lot of money from me. How much money are we talking here?
No, definitely don't need any of your money. In fact, we can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership.
Okay, now I think I'm getting what you're going at here. We need to spend money to make money, so we're talking some big gains here. Big gains.
No, definitely no. I don't need any of your money. Just all we need to make a podcast right in one place.
Okay. So what you're telling me is that you're gonna need a pretty big check from me for this podcast. So do I just make it out to cash? Because it's no problem for me. I'll just write it up right now.
No. Listen, Dean, just head over to anchor.fm and check it out. You'll see why Anchor is the best place for us to record, edit, and distribute our podcasts. And I definitely do not need any of your money.
Shut up and take my money.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the second half of our double feature picture show. Sorry, I'm hyped up on sugar and adrenaline from watching this movie, Predator.
I'm drinking green tea all damn day.
Now, David, we're in Predator time, 1987. Now, I'm going to give you context for this one, because this might help. So, Predator comes out 1987. That year, Lethal Weapon comes out. The Untouchable comes out. Beverly Hills Cop 2 comes out. And the number one film at the box office is Three Men and a Baby. Yes.
Oh, Lord.
And at the Academy Awards, the winner of Best Picture is The Last Emperor.
Okay.
And, yeah. So, then we have Predator, which, oddly enough, was kind of snubbed when it was released. It was one of those movies that didn't even make a lot of money when it was released right away, and it kind of dwelled in the Blockbuster Video rent you on a lazy Saturday realm for a long time. And then it just picked up a bunch of steam as the nostalgia pick for all time. So, I love Predator. I've watched this movie since I was a kid. I can't talk about this movie objectively anymore. It is, to me, the perfect action film. It is perfect entertainment.
Yeah, I would agree that as far as an action film goes, it's probably, again, just like we described with Aliens, pretty textbook. You don't have to do a whole lot to set up the damn thing other than get some buff-looking main characters on screen and give them some guns and give them a mission. And then that's where you really start to transform things, which is what this movie does. We start, and aside from a little tease that something extraterrestrial might go on, we're just watching Arnold Schwarzenegger have a cigar. I don't know, I was about to say spliffy, but that's certainly not what it was. Just having a cigar in this beautifully silhouetted sunset scene. What more could you ask for?
Yes.
To hook you in.
Okay. The opening sequence when they get off the chopper and it's like all the Marines and everything getting out, and when Arnold sees Carl Weathers and they do the handshake or the arm wrestling, to the one from all the memes.
Legendary.
I am not gonna legendary, and I'm not gonna lie. I got hit by the nostalgia bomb right there. Like, I've seen this movie like so many times since I was like a kid, so it's kind of weird again to talk about this objectively, but we'll try. David, can you please give us a quick plot rundown for this movie?
Yes, I can. Oh, where to begin with this lovely, lovely masterpiece of story? Well, like I said, we open on a troop of commandos landing on the beaches somewhere in Central America, in which they are coming together for a secret mission, of which they will have to recover someone or something from the forest. Our main character, played by one Arnie, is going to help lead this mission, along with his old war buddy, played by Carl Weathers, in which, like Dean says, they have a lovely moment. Bromant, you could even say. So the team heads into the forest with a bunch of other aggressive and muscly men who have their own quirks, including one which is quite noticeably Jesse Ventura. That's right. That's what his name.
His name is Jesse the Body Ventura.
The Body.
That man was the governor of Minnesota. Thank you very much.
A lot of governors in this movie, now that you think about it.
Yeah. Now you think about it.
So let's see. The team goes on to come across the wreckage of a helicopter, of which something foul play seems to have gone on. So that's the beginning of their investigation, which eventually leads them to a group of insurgents or rebels or drug runners, what have you, who have a base that they're kind of working out of. And what do we do other than blow it the fuck up? I mean,
the greatest action scene in cinema history. That
Yeah,
one.
certainly they gave the guy the explosives and pyrotechnics guy a run for his money, and after completely obliterating this troop and everything in the camp, they are left with what other than a lone survivor who I guess is a hostage. Because again, I will make a point of this later, but the dialogue in this movie is mixed so quietly that I had a hard time picking up on certain pieces of dialogue while watching it. But I did remember that they call her a hostage of sorts at one point, and her name is Anna. And Anna is a scrappy little. She's trying to get away, but I didn't really catch for why. Anyways, so they're taking Anna back through the forest, and that is when things start to get really fishy, because what else is out there other than a violent alien species that is hunting down humans? That's what we all paid price of admission for anyway. So after running into the thing, the predator, as we'll call it, several times, which it is a much more advanced thing than the xenomorph, complete with cloaking technology, thermal imaging, lasers that come out of its shoulder. I mean, just lions, tigers, and bears, oh my. Several members of the team are killed off in violent fashion while they are getting away with Anna. That's when the soldiers finally are getting towards their pickup point, and things go haywire, and Arnold has to do what? Fight the predator.
No. Get to the chopper. Obviously.
That too as well.
It's so good. This movie is full of great lines, by the way.
Oh, two very quotable movies this week. We made a point of that right before the break, but yeah, this one especially, it was like, just as like the arm meme is kind of recent. I feel like that one certainly,
Yes.
especially because it's been in painted form, which is the one I think people mostly pass around in meme circles. But Get to the Chopper has to be like one of the earliest memes ever.
Oh yeah. Or I ain't got time to bleed, which is like the dumbest line, but it's just great. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. And all right, now David, I have a question for you. Is this the most racially diverse cast in any action film?
Man, that's a good question.
I'm looking at the cast and I'm like, all right, we have Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's European, Carl Weathers and Bill Duke, who are African American. We have Jesse the Body Ventura, who is just American, white dude. We have Sonny Landham, who is an indigenous person, and Richard Chavez, who is of Hispanic heritage, and Shane Black, who is the essence of how screenwriters should write action movies. So it's kind of interesting.
All fair points.
Is it?
I feel like it was. Where did I say this? But there was like a movie I was referencing. I was talking about this with my girlfriend. Oh, we were talking about The Thing. And, there's obviously this trope and or meme or whatever you want to call it of like, there's always that like token black person who's supposed to die in the horror movie. It's a thing that they've done. And I just remembered going back to like The Thing, and I was like, it was kind of refreshing that it was a more racially diverse group of people that were following through the movie. In this movie as well, it was like, it wasn't something I like picked up on or was like, oh, that's great. But yeah, there was part of me that noticed it and was like, okay, at least we're not doing all white guys or something. I don't know. I mean, listen, I always go back to the fact that I like Carl Weathers a lot in this. I mean, he's just
Awesome.
I don't know. There's that guy is like, maybe it's also because my first encounter with him is Happy Gilmore, so it's like it's kind of a different thing. But
Dude, you just blew my mind. I just realized that is Carl Weathers is in Happy Gilmore.
yeah, and
My God.
I don't know. He's the perfect guy to put on screen sometimes. There's a time and a place for him that is just, it's perfect, and in this movie he is.
Yep. And honestly, let's talk about that a little bit. So I know we're kind of talking a little bit slyly about these guys. They're put a bunch of big meaty guys in front of the camera and let them just shoot guns. But there's legitimate character going on here. Like, these guys, yeah, they're big muscles piled on top of muscles wrapped in camouflage, but I feel like Bill Duke playing Mac and Jesse the Body Ventura playing Blaine, I feel like those two actually have like a really good on-screen chemistry. I think there's actually like real character going on there. More on Bill Duke's end than Jesse Ventura, but they call him the body, not the method. So
that's true. Yeah, I did notice something that was going on there. I want to ask your opinion on this because, again, you've seen this plenty more times than I have.
I have a problem.
And
yes.
It kind of seems like there's something there that the movie doesn't explain that I'm interested to know more about. Mm-hmm. Why is Bill Duke so upset that Jesse Ventura dies? Like, there's part of it, like, that particular death seems to affect him a hell of a lot more than other deaths. And listen, yeah. I'm going to come out and say it. Blaine isn't the most personable guy in the movie. As one,
what is his first line in this movie? A bunch of slack-jawed slur for homosexual people in this in this chopper. Like, yeah, he's kind of a upfront, loud, obnoxious jock character.
Yeah, he's trying to walk into the room with the biggest dick. That's definitely what's going on here. And as Dylan puts it, he's got quite a nasty habit. So there's just some part of me that's like, okay, is there something going on between Mac and Blaine that I don't know about, or is it just a really good friendship, or what's going on here?
So what I have always gathered, because I've seen the movie a few times, and in the scene where Bill Dukes have like drinking over his body, he's just talking to the moon. And he's having like that monologue. And what I gathered is him and Blaine were the guys who were in the shit together the most. It's like one of those things where it's maybe it's commentating on like that brotherly bond you get when you're in combat with somebody, which is a thing that, yeah, it's a real thing, but it's commentated in movies all the fucking time. Yeah. Where the closest like male bonding thing you can ever have is fighting alongside somebody in war, which, yeah, basically war movies are the men's version of like romantic comedies, because like male friendships can only happen in war movies. The more you know. But yeah, are you asking if there was like a gay thing going on there?
Well, I guess this is just like 2021 viewer bleeding into the whole thing, because there's some part of me that's like, yeah, there's no way that these two characters, after really thinking about it, but there's another part of me that's like, okay,
would this be the most progressive action movie of all time if we had the most racially diverse cast and two of the characters were gay lovers?
I don't know,
in the film,
because there's some part of me that's like, we referenced that line at the beginning, and there's some part of me that's like thinking, again, in modern times, a lot of people always go back to that whole thing, is a homophobic person is just hiding something through hate. And part of me was like, hey, that combined with this really odd, to me, out of place almost character moment, means there could be something further. But, I guess I do think about the fact that it kind of in our conversation in the first half, there is something Vietnamish going on here. I mean, Carl Weathers, as Dylan also says, I didn't realize how much I missed this. While two helos are hovering above the jungle, one can only assume what they're missing. They're missing the shit. They're missing Vietnam. They're, these are guys who were probably, as they said, in Laos or these more deep cover places that they were soldiers more along the lines of being like a star quarterback than a grunt. That's for sure. That's what these guys are.
I mean, I going back to Mac and Blaine, they even, like, Mac even says, we got ambushed, you and me, after that everything goes to shit, but you and me are standing at the end of it, not a scratch on us. And it does go into that. These guys aren't grunts, right? None of these characters are the nameless guy that dies. They all have a little bit of character to them.
Yeah.
like Shane Black's character, who's probably the least developed of the cast, he's still like, you see him and you know, okay, he's the geeky one that tells the bad sex jokes. Okay, yeah, there's a character
Yeah.
there. I can get behind that.
Yeah, I do think that they do a pretty good job at giving everybody an assigned role as a character throughout the troupe. I mean, there's Arnie and Carl, who are kind of these main two guys who are butting heads over differences up as far as like tactical thoughts. Then you have like the Blaine and Mac thing where it's like one dies and now the other one's like, I've lost all my touch because I relied on having the confidence of another person in order to get through these high adrenaline moments. Shane Black is that person who's like, I don't function well in high adrenaline moments, so I kind of need to... It's like comedic relief, but the thing I liked about it is that they make a note that comedic relief is more of an anxiety tension thing than it is just for a laugh. And I thought that was, oddly enough for an action movie original, a refreshing turn on the trope.
And, Shane Black, the guy goes on to write Lethal Weapon, your favorite film of all time.
Yes, that is true. I mean, that's also what I find kind of interesting. Shane Black is an interesting professional within the like the movie making industry, because obviously more known now as the prolific action movie director, but yeah, I mean, does a really good job as a character actor in this movie.
Yeah, and it is interesting that I keep going back on the acting in this movie. To your point earlier, it's not going to win Oscars, but in terms of like serving the story, I think it all works.
Yeah.
So, but then there's the thing in the room, the elephant or the predator in the room, the predator. And you had a point that you were very adamant about in terms of its camouflage technology. Would you like to elaborate?
Okay, so I'm going to be blunt after I describe it as far as what I thought of it. But what we have here is a couple... It's like the same thing happened in Aliens. There's some technical things going on here that are selling points for the movie. That's what they are. They're reasons to get people to come to the theater beyond the story. Because the story is a good way to connect people to the movie, but is it a good way to get them to look at the preview and then say, hey, I'll make a commitment to go see this in a few months? Not always. Sometimes you need a little bit more than that. And what's the selling point of a story about a low-budget action movie of some guys trudging through a jungle that's probably just kind of manufactured in the hills of LA? Well, you put thermal imaging, which is one of the things I do enjoy about this movie. It's certainly aged, but it's still...
It's the POV of the predator, which is unique.
It's unique, and it was new at the time. Then they got this extra interesting thing, if I'm putting myself back in the year, of using what I would assume be like some sort of special effects masking in order to literally create what, since like the Invisible Man did, probably way back in the day, a legitimately invisible character, which, especially in the context of the movie, is like it would get your blood pumping, and it's supposed to. But okay, this is where I start to dissociate. They do a good job at like thinking of the design, right? Because the it's not invisible and then it like pops out of nowhere, like you would think they might do in order to make it look better. They do give it like shape and form in which it seems that light bends around the form of the character while it's moving, which, especially nowadays, is how they think of cloaking technology. Anytime I've heard about it, it requires the refracting and bending of light around an object in order to get you to see the light waves that would be coming from behind the object. So that was I think a really good consideration by whatever the production team did. But then it's like, I think this is a problem where that thing that they would require in production isn't quite there yet. That it probably needs a couple more years before they can do it quite properly, because it does look quite, I'll put the word out, choppy.
The shimmer effect on the predator is just not not up to snuff for you.
It's interesting because I listen again. I go back to if I put myself in the shoes of a person in 1987 watching this in the movies, that's insane. But again, it's just one of those. It's certainly the thing this week that did not age well for me.
Okay. Now, I'll say this. I will admit that, yeah, you can tell this is made in 1987. The effects are serviceable, but not great. But it's interesting because in Aliens, we had a lot of things that were more on the lines of like special effects, where if you were going to do this in 2021 to whatever, you would use a computer. Whereas Predator, I feel there's only one thing you would need a computer or a good like special effects team for, and that's just the Predator. And it is interesting. I will say this. The choppiness of the shimmering invisibility of the Predator is a little sketch, but the Predator design when we see it is amazing.
Yeah, it's literally like iconic, and that totally I could give credence to because they've never changed it over the years, and especially when certain things from these franchises have gotten updates, the Predator has changed very little, and I think for a good reason. It looks pretty good when you finally do see it on screen, and for all of the certain shots come to mind with that invisibility of like it jumping through trees. Which was pretty much just like if I went into After Effects and just put like a blur effect on something, that's kind of pretty much what it looks like. Which is questionable. But I still think a lot of the other things pick up for it that at least make you think, okay, yeah. If I look back, it's good.
Would you like to know a fun fact about the Predator?
I would, yeah. Something fun.
Do you know who suggested the mandibles, like the mouth thing for the Predator, for its design?
Yeah, these kind of insect-like fangs of sorts.
Yeah, one of the most iconic things about the Predator when you look at it is those mandibles. You know who suggested that? James Cameron.
Of course he did.
Yeah, well, he was doing Aliens. Sam Winston, who was working on Aliens for the effects team, he was like, James Cameron made an offhand comment, like, I always wanted to make an alien with mandibles and stuff like that, something like this, and he draws him a little picture, and then when Sam Winston gets pegged to do Predator, and he's making the mask design, he's like, oh, I can use James's photo. It's like, that'll be cool, I'll throw it in there. So yeah, James Cameron, he's even has a slight responsibility for Predator. Fucking bastard.
Oh, to be in a time when things were just wide open Wild West and everything was new and exciting.
It's nice. Yeah. But so another interesting thing about the year that this film came out. So 1987, and we're looking at a very weird year for movies. Because we have Lethal Weapon that comes out, we have The Untouchables, we have Beverly Hills Cop 2, which are action-y kind of movies and lean that way a little bit. But the other films are like Three Men and a Baby, Good Morning Vietnam, Moonstruck, things like, or Witches of Eastwick. Do you think the action movie template is starting to go away from these, Arnold Schwarzenegger-esque giant beefy dudes, and is going towards like the more like Mel Gibson kind of action star? Or like the diehards, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of a similar thing that you can look at when thinking about like the transformation of westerns, right? There was a time in which John Wayne and good upstanding kind of
square-jawed, all-American guy.
I was about to say chisel-jawed. That wasn't quite, but square-jawed, all-American, kind of paternal-looking types. That was the type. Up until then, we kind of started getting, as Quentin Tarantino, I think, has often put it, androgynous, kind of more rusty, scruffy-looking guys. For example, then we looked at this the other month, the shift from John Wayne to a Clint Eastwood type, who still has plenty of ruggedness to him that I think isn't quite encapsulating the totality of that switch. But you know, I do think there's that kind of thing going on where, as we get into like the late '80s, into maybe the '90s per se, which I think Lethal Weapons as a series certainly went into, I feel like that kind of action movie character got a little bit more urbanized versus being totally these powerhouses that are out in like the frontiers and wastelands of society. Because Mel Gibson, like you said, you know, he's still got plenty to him, but there's a part of me that's like, you know, I feel like you have to, especially when relating it back to then crime films, which is a much more urban genre, just kind of make the switch for casting. So I think it comes down to more like a difference in genre needs rather than like trends or anything. I also think that maybe that is a reason that Arnie had to move to the romantic comedies of the like, because, you know.
I mean, when you do look at his filmography, it does go basically up into 1991, where he does Terminator 2, and then after that, that's when we start having things like The Last Action Hero, True Lies, Batman and Robin kind of things, where it's a lot more less Terminator 2, we'll put it like that.
Yeah.
There's a little bit more action, comedy, romancy stuff going on. I'm wondering, is Predator pretty much the last of the 80s action films that we think of, the stereotypical 80s action films? Big explosions, big guns, not too much story, just entertainment.
That's a good question, because it's like I would qualify a couple of his subsequent films under this kind of idea. Like Terminator 2 Judgment Day is, again, probably one of the best action movies of all time, but then it kind of follows a similar type of sorts. I would also venture to say that a movie like Total Recall has a little bit of that in it, although it's a little bit more sci-fi-ish than this. I don't know, because it's like I'm trying to look as far as where this came out, but I was looking for where Junior is, like what year that came out, because that is another famous Arnold Schwarzenegger movie I haven't quite mentioned yet. What year was that? I'm looking through the IMDb to find it, but I can't. For some reason, I'm not looking at it.
No worries, it happens. I did have an interesting thing.
Okay.
Ooh, 94. All right. That's interesting. So I just feel that Predator as a film is a lot more than we kind of give it credit for. Cuz it's one of these movies that I think is arguably a perfect example of an action film, if I'm being completely honest, because it does everything a good I'm just about entertainment kind of film should do. It has characters that are fun that you can identify with a little bit. There's cool action, there's a lot of adventure, there's awesome set pieces, there's cool stunts, the villain is interesting. There's so many little things that pile up into this that make me think that this should have been much bigger than it was. And that kind of leads me to this thing. So, David, how much do you think Predator cost to make?
That's a good question, because I kind of made this comment before we started, but there are times when it does feel like they're circling around the same patch of jungle for most of the movie. They probably didn't need a whole lot of production space, as it were, to pull this thing off. Because I don't know, it was probably done in Los Angeles or something, right? They didn't go on location. They did.
No, they went on location. Oh. They went down to South America and filmed in a real jungle. Okay. They chopped out huge sections of the jungle just so the camera would line up right for like certain shots.
Fascinating.
What is it? I think half the crew had like Montezuma's Revenge and like had leeches problems. I think the mud that Arnold's in when they're at night, it's like it's like freezing. Like he legitimately was shivering in 90% of like the shots because it was so cold when they were shooting at night.
That is fascinating, because that would obviously prompt me to then say, okay, the budget is probably quite a bit more in that respect. And I don't know, because there's a part of me that certainly thinks that there's a there's not a whole lot that's like new to this movie, right? Yeah, they probably had to get some military equipment. They have to get the guns. The pyrotechnics, I'm sure, are not cheap. But then it's like none of the action feels like it begs for quite a bit from the production team. I feel like for the most part, in the staging age of all of this, they're able to set up everything they need to do, and are like, okay, now we just need to go out and do it on the day. So I'm gonna, especially because now I have to adjust for inflation. I'm throwing out a number, and I have no clue if it's gonna be right. We haven't done this game in a while, so I'm sure I'm rusty. I'm finally gonna say $20-ish million.
Oh, okay. You're a little high.
Okay.
This comes in at about 15 million estimated.
That's what I was originally going to say, because part of me was like, okay, 10 million's not going to be enough. 15 million
Now,
starts to feel right, but then I'm like, okay, you have to remember lots of guns and explosions.
yeah, and also paying actors and stuff like that, because I think Arnold was just about that like famous star you can sell a movie on. But here's the thing. This is why I bring it up, the budget. It's $15 million. Its opening weekend in the United States and Canada, on July 14th, the year of our Lord, it makes $12 million. Its opening weekend doesn't even make its budget back. Its worldwide gross for everything doesn't even break $100 million. And I think that's fascinating, because on paper, this should make a bunch of money. This should work, even going off the success of Aliens from the year before. Because Aliens, if you want to take a shot, don't worry about it. I'll save the trouble, because it's actually on the money. It cost about $20 million from that studio, and it made $130 million.
Yeah.
So is it just like a thing where Predator, was that really the signal point where it's like Predator just a relic of an age that the film industry is moving past of? It was like the last one out.
I don't know, because like Predator goes on to have a franchise. You know, it doesn't stop here. And especially when you think about it, like, okay, you said 15 million was it, and then it goes out and makes $100 million. I mean, that's still
a little under it, but yeah,
it's
closer to like 90 million.
But that's still wildly successful in certain ways. Like you making, if my math is correct, over 6 times the budget. So it's like, you know, they get their return, and especially when advertising back then was probably a lot cheaper, in my mind. I don't know. I think Predator got plenty of recognition after the fact that it deserved. Like you said, I don't know. It'd take having to have experienced whatever the zeitgeist was to really understand the full cultural impact of that. Especially when, you know, like you said, Aliens had something already. You know, Alien had come out and it was a huge thing, especially for Ridley Scott, that then prompted James Cameron to build off that, and he did it very well. So when you can do that, it works. Especially because, to this point I made about like Predator feeling a bit like the set looked the same most of the time. I think for me, and you know, I was watching it and I was kind of like, I could see how this could feel a little smaller versus something like Aliens, which was ginormous to our point that we made in the first half of the show. So I don't know, maybe there is something there. I think too, like, Predator doesn't have very much world building, kind of. It's more of an action movie.
It's a more by the numbers action flick.
Yeah. Whereas, like, I feel like Aliens delving into the world helps you see it one or two more times. So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of factors that can kind of go into that, I think.
Well, David, I think it's about that time for us to get into the last little section of our podcast here, our little discussion, where we bring these two movies together and we set them up and we compare them a little bit more. Because we already started, so might as well finish it up. So, David, we have Aliens and we have Predator. I guess the first thing I should really ask you is, do these feel like the best kind of action movies we could have chosen for this. For this, sci-fi month.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the sci-fi action movie is a very specific thing that in more modern successful takes encompass things like what was that Tom Cruise movie,
Live, Die, Repeat, or something like that.
it was something like this. It was like tomorrow, the something
Edge of Tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's probably like the more common example of like an action-based sci-fi, because that it has to do plenty with like the commando aspect of things, but it's more heady premise because everybody needs a heady premise to get into a sci-fi film nowadays. Reference Arrival from last week. So I mean, I think the thing I boil down to when coming to this pair of films is it's films about battling aliens that don't have to do with giant space battles. It's hand-to-hand combat with the competing species. And what I think that does versus something that has more to do with like the alien invasion trope per se, is it focuses more on like the primal food pyramid or whatever they said, like the food chain or whatever the term people say is like, where humans are thought to be at the top of this pile, and then all of a sudden something comes in and disrupts that. It'd be this. It's the same story, which is in a way primal, to the point of like the leopard and the gazelle on the savannah, and in a way, both these movies do that quite well. Especially when Aliens takes that premise and expounds upon it to further that kind of biological theme. So I think both of these pair together very well, because you could just as well pair, I think, Alien, the original, with Predator, but I think you get kind of, when focusing on that specific within the genre, a transformation that helps transform the double feature in a little bit of a way. Kind of like we got last week with Arrival and Contact, where you have the original iteration of what they thought and then kind of an updated version of that. Although neither were sequels, there was still a transformation by the end.
So I guess that actually brings my question, because we were in agreement that Contact and Arrival were, in essence, like kind of the perfect double feature when we look at our little secret criteria, I guess. Do you think Aliens and Predator hit that perfect balance for a double feature?
Yeah, I think there's something maybe a little bit more to be desired in the pairing of the two, because there's like a little bit of a different execution in how they both handle it. On one hand, you have a movie that's trying to compete with, at the time, the likes of the Star Wars series. Back then, although I'm not well versed in the history, maybe the Star Trek series as well.
Well, funny you should ask, because in 1986, when Aliens debuted, it debuted at number 7. It was number 7 in the box office, and number 5, what beat it out was Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home.
Yeah, so it's like, it's trying to compete with more franchise names. It itself is trying to be a franchise. It's trying to take a little bit more of this, like, Blade Runner is another sci-fi movie from the decade that has a lot of world building in it, although on a different subject. Whereas I feel like Predator is competing more with the likes of an action movie, and especially considering it is one. I think there's different ways you could say they are and aren't good for each other. I think at the end of it, it's a good pairing. I enjoyed it. It's just that maybe a little less perfect than others, but it's still pretty good.
Okay. Well, I guess that kind of brings us down to the last question I have here. If you can only watch one this weekend, what are you going to watch?
I would go back and watch Aliens. Predator's good. I like it.
Blasphemy.
Yeah, I'm sure, Dean. But, and I will say, if I had a full bladder, I'd go back and watch Predator. But Aliens I just enjoyed more overall because it's a more fully realized movie as a whole, whereas like if I'm just looking for guns and explosions, I'm going to Predator. Especially to the fact that like Aliens at certain times is scary, and I feel like that's what most like that's two both of these films are trying, at least in a little bit, to be a little bit horrific. There's especially a kind of like a horror sheen to something like Predator in the way they approach. It's kind of like a monster movie almost, is what I felt like.
Well, these are monster movies at their heart.
Exactly, and Aliens certainly was trying to follow up what was essentially a horror movie. So, go figure.
I understand. I would say that the dichotomy of this is where Aliens is the film that seeks to have a little bit more theming and a little bit more things going on behind the curtain, whereas Predator is a lot more interested in the entertainment value. I think that's the perfect way to describe it. Predator is pure entertainment, and it is wonderful. So I guess if you just want to sit down, turn your brain off, and just have a couple of beers, Predator is probably where it's at. If you want to sit down and look at the movie a little bit more, Aliens is probably your better bet. But with that, David, we talked a little bit about franchises, how these two spawned a franchise. And next week, we're going to be talking about the best of two of the greatest sci-fi franchises of all time. David, what are we watching?
Yeah, we're kind of hitting more on that sequel side this week. We're going to be watching sequels to, again, two of the first of the greatest of these franchises. We're going to be touching Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, everybody's favorite Star Wars movie, as well as a sequel from the competing Star Trek franchise, The Wrath of Khan.
And this is going to be interesting because I believe arguably the two movies we brought here are literally the best in their franchises. Right? I don't think is there anybody who says that Empire isn't the best Star Wars movie?
That's certainly,
because personally my favorite's A New Hope, but that's just me.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, there's certainly an argument to be made that the original is the one to beat. I would go as far as to say that most of the time people are right. And they say Empire Strikes Back is probably the most well executed of any of the Star Wars movies, unless you're like me and you just have a soft spot in your heart for Episode 1, because you just like to defy everybody in their opinions about what is and isn't cringy because y'all like the new Star Wars movies. Not throwing shade, just stating facts.
Hot fire is spat.
There will be plenty when we get into a bunch of Star Wars talk next week, but yeah, and for me, I am not very much at all familiar with Star Trek. I am firmly a Star Wars guy, and I know it's most often you're either planted firmly in Star Wars or you're a pretty big Star Trek guy who knows a lot about Star Wars still. It's rare that you run into the diehard Star Trek fan who does not know a whole lot of Star Wars stuff.
Well, yeah, no, I'm not that person. I fall on the opinion that Star Trek is like my jam. I love me some good Star Trek. I love the original series. I like me some Next Generation. I've watched all the movies. This one of those things where it's like, you put on like Star Trek, any of the movies, I'm gonna sit there and watch them. I ain't gonna lie to you. And Wrath of Khan is borderlines on Shakespearean in how good it is. It has its subjects of revenge, of humanity. It is amazing. And it is also the movie that basically saved the Star Trek film franchise off its back. Just saying. There's a reason why people say only every other Star Trek movie is good. Don't worry about it. But yeah, and it's going to be interesting because I know a lot about Star Wars because I live in the 20th century. And it's just a thing. But I feel not a lot of people get onto Star Trek. I feel Star Trek is either a thing only older people like, or like people who grew up around older people who liked Star Trek. Whereas Star Wars, I feel, is like a lot more like universal, and it's going to be interesting to talk about that.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the conversation next week is going to be about kind of these franchises that, how do you commercialize these things for a broad audience? And that's going to be fascinating to talk about, because I feel like we've never really gotten into that side of the film industry before on the podcast, where we start to talk about, okay, there's the movie, but what exists after the movie,
And these are also sequels that come from lineage before them and have a huge effect after them. I mean, to speak about it simply, why is it that these sci-fi films are in the largest franchises of all time? I mean, granted, I think Marvel probably beats both of them out by now.
Well,
I mean, Star Trek might have fallen off once we hit into like the 20 teens and like the 2020s. By now it's probably not the largest franchise of all time. It's still Die Hard more than anything, and Star Wars has exploded, but it has a weird toxic subculture within it that is very hard to deal with, but we'll get to
yeah,
that.
we certainly will. It's hard not to approach both of those without talking about those lovely communities. But
But if you wanted to listen to that,
yeah.
where can they find us?
Well, you can find us wherever you're listening to us currently, and that is most likely on a podcast player, wherever you can find podcasts. That may include Spotify, Radio Public, Overcast, other podcast players. Apparently, we're on Apple Music now, so go check us out. Search for us. You can find us at wherever, Double Feature Picture Show. Search it, and we're probably there. You can also check out the Anchor link, which has links to all of our podcast platforms in the description of whichever you're watching this on. Or rather, if you are watching us, you're probably on our YouTube, which is In the Frame. We post this podcast along with our hobby podcast, Too Obscure for TV, our sort of sister podcast, in which Dean and his lovely girlfriend do one movie every week, in which case you don't have time or can't handle two movies from two guys, and it's just too much.
You can go to the Film Club podcast, where it's a lot more chill and relaxed, and we don't get this deep and pretentious about 80s action
How
films.
relaxing. But you can also follow along with us on our social medias. We have an Instagram, which is at @DD_Double Feature Picture Show. We remind you about our episodes on there, as well as you can find us on TikTok. We'll be posting some extra content every now and again on there. And that TikTok is going to be just Double Feature Picture Show. That's pretty much it as far as that goes. Go find us, give us the likes and follows and all those kinds of things. It really helps to finally see that this thing might be going someplace. So thank you guys for all of the support.
And with that, David, I'll see you next week.
See you then, Dean.